which brings us to our first document camera example. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you some example data that's going to be a very simple made-up data set and show you how we can go from that raw data, so what we saw in the big spreadsheet, to a frequency table format. And for this raw data, we're going to say that we have information about how many times 12 people were arrested. And so what I'm going to write out here are just the number of arrests for these 12 people. So in no particular order, not organized in any way, just raw data like we have in that spreadsheet with the class data in. So somebody was arrested twice, somebody was arrested once, somebody has 0 arrests, somebody else has 0 arrests, somebody has 1 arrest, and so on. And so I'll keep filling in this line, where you can imagine each of these are the numbers that 12 people have been, a number of times that these 12 people have been arrested. 1, 0, 4. Alright, so we should have 12 numbers here, and again, this is raw, completely unorganized data, where we just know that we have 12 people, and each of them has been arrested some number of times. So our variable is number of arrests here, and each of these are each of our observations. And in order to create a frequency table, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to start by listing out the observations that appear in our data. And so I'll write out number of arrests again. This is our variable. And I'm going to list out the observations that we have in our data set here. Again, small data set, only 12 people. But the thing we're doing here will apply to any data that you could possibly work with. So our first part of the frequency table here is that we're going to list out our observations. Our lowest number of arrests is 0, and our highest number of arrests is 4. So I'm just going to list out the observations from 0 through 4. And that's our first part. So I said on the last slide that our frequency table shows the observations that appear in a data set. That is this list right here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Nothing less than 0, of course, and nothing greater than 5. So I've listed out what we have here. The second thing I'm going to do to create a frequency table is going to be to list out the number of times that each of these observations appears in the data. So this is our definition for a frequency. As you can see here, I'm just denoting it with F, that means frequency. And I'm going to fill in a number for each of our different observations. So what I can do is I can look through the data here and I can say, how many zeros do we have? We've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so I'll list 4 as my frequency. How many 1s do we have? We've got 1, 2, 3. So we'll list 3 as my frequency for this observation of 1 arrest. 2 2s, so we'll list 2 as my frequency for 2. Only 1 3, so we'll list 1 as my frequency for 3. And 2 4s, so I'll list 2 as my frequency for 4. And that's the second step of creating a frequency table, where we are listing out the number of times that each of our observations appears in the data. And so with this very small data set here, we can eyeball it. Of course, if you're working with larger data sets, like our 70-person class sample, or again, that 700 or 7,000 person sample you can imagine, we're not going to be doing it by hand. But a frequency table is, at its most basic format, what we just did here. Count up the number of times each observation appears in the data set, and list that as the frequency for each of your observations. Our third and final component for the frequency table that I mentioned on the last slide is the total number of observations, which we'll refer to as n. Arrests, again, we could also call x, our variable. And our total is just the number of observations that appear in the data. So our data here are the number of times that 12 people have arrested. We have 12 different observations. Again, you could count them up from 1 through 12. And so we'll list 12 as our total here. And that's it. We have created our first frequency table. And with that, I'm going to head back into the slides and show you some frequency tables for the class data as well.